So we're still on the Empire State Trail, but here's a section without much of a bike lane, just south of Germantown. Now we're on 199 going across the Hudson River, and this still is part of the Empire State Trail, and they even have quite a bit more shoulder for bikes, and the delineation is better. See how long that holds up. There was a sign back there that said bicycles allowed in the lane, but I don't know. Went to a bike shop and they said that went to a bike shop in Hudson, and they said the biking around here is getting better, but it's not really that conducive to road biking. I can see why on a narrow road like this.
Should have it on the water.
We're at the start of the aqueduct that goes to New York City from the Catskill Mountains. So 90% of the water for New York City comes from the Catskill Mountains in the distance and goes by gravity flow through an underground aqueduct all the way to the city. Doesn't really tell us much about everything, but we'll walk around and see what we can find. City of New York Catskill Water Supply, erected AD 1915. Must be the valve at the dam for releasing the water. And the aqueduct probably heads that way. So it makes sense that they would generate hydroelectric power from so there's a dam behind the inlet for the aqueduct, and you have that elevation head of water dropping, and they use ultraviolet light to disinfect the water. You would think they could generate the power for the ultraviolet light from the flow of water, but I don't see any power lines. There is maybe it's underground, there is a transformer and or some electrical equipment over there. Boy, it'd be neat to go inside and take a look. What does this say? Well, that's just a landmark. Probably don't want to collapse the aqueduct. So you just can't walk off and climb up the bank or walk outside the boundaries of this area. I see that sign quite often around here, so I guess you're not allowed to stray off this park. You can see the Catskill Mountains in the distance here. We'll figure a way to get on top of the reservoir bank there and hopefully have a better view of that. See if we can catch a rainbow in the spray. So from what I understand, the watershed that feeds the Asheville Reservoir is in public and private hands. The land is, but there are strict restrictions on any pollution that you can do on your property that might end up in the New York City's water supply. And so it's not surprising that you have Environmental Protection Police, City of New York Environmental Protection Police. I guess that's what they're for, to enforce that. Well, let's see if we can find a viewpoint of the dam. Okay, we're actually 73 miles north of New York City. So the system started in 1915. So there's where we're at, and this is the watershed. So we're right there, and that's the canal that goes all the way down to New York City, or the aqueduct actually. It's underground. 90% of the water comes from the Catskills and 10% from the Croton watershed. Some information here on what you can do and any permits required. The reservoir flooded 4 little towns. So the system supplies more than 1 billion gallons of water per day for 9 million people. Their water is so clean that it doesn't require filtration and only minimal treatment. There's well, the Ashokan Reservoir, which we're at right now, has 5.5 miles of dams and dikes. So this reservoir isn't like just in a valley where one simple dam or narrow dam can hold it. They had to really create their own valley or whatever by building 5.5 miles of dam and dike.
On both sides of the Hudson River, where the decision was made to cross. You had Storm King Mountain on the west, you had Breakneck Mountain on the east. Getting that information, what was down below, required boring into the bottom of the Hudson River, to the bed of the Hudson River. No one knew how deep it was there. We knew it was one of the deepest sections of the Hudson, but it wasn't surveyed that tight. So barges were put into the Hudson River to do these deep drilling, and seasons were spent trying to do these borings, and then you had challenges. It was a navigable river. You had ships going back and forth. You can't block the channel. You get wakes from large boats, which would disturb the drilling. And in the winter, when the ice came through, you're not going to do any drilling in the winter. That ice would just push everything out. So despite the best efforts of the surveyors and engineers, the borings in the river itself were unsuccessful. The question was still, how do you figure out what's underneath it? So the plan was come up, instead of doing this vertical drilling to collect that geologic information, there were shafts dug on both sides of the Hudson. They were dug down on both sides using drill and blast method. You had really solid rock on both sides, and they were excavated big enough so you could put in drilling rigs at different angles, and then at a 45-degree angle or a 30-degree angle. You know, they required longer borings to do that, but you were able to then collect that information underneath the Hudson River to figure out at what elevation that would be needed to get down to get safely under that channel. So that problem was solved, and it was a lot deeper than the engineers at the time thought. So the bottom of the crossing had to be 1,100 feet below sea level, which is tremendous. So to get there, there were shafts dug on both sides using drill and blast techniques, getting down to elevation. Once you're down to elevation, there was hauling in from both sides. So on both sides, you had a crew from the Breakneck Mountain side on the east and the Storm King Mountain side on the west that drilled and blast to get through there, and there's a competition where you're going to end up in which side was going to go farther than the other side. They did eventually meet in the middle, and there were a lot of challenges along the way. You're doing this at a very deep elevation. You'd have rocks split off at times underneath. There were lives lost in the construction. There were seams of water that poured in, and then the shaft was broken through. The tunnel section was lined, and it provided that connection. It was the connection, it was the challenge the engineers most feared about the entire project, how that water was going to get across there. And even today, this remains the deepest piece of New York City's infrastructure at 1,100 feet below sea level. There's nothing below that in the city's vast array of different infrastructure we have, and it's still a tremendous engineering accomplishment, even though it was early on the list for J. Waldo Smith. He went on to do other great things after he completed the Catskill water supply system.
And so this is the only time I'm going to put words in your mouth, because I can already hear the drama in what you just said. But I just want to connect what you said about no one knew how deep it was going to be, and it ended up being a lot deeper than they imagined. Could you just sort of restate that succinctly, that concept?
Well, no one knew how deep it was going to be, but it ended up being a lot deeper than they imagined.
Great, I apologize.
And I mean, right, it captivated the public so much that it inspired poetry. I mean, there were actually poems written about that section of it.
There's a lot of poems. Yeah. I'm not going to recite a poem though.
Wouldn't that be fun?
I think that was, is there anything else about the engineering of the Hudson siphon that you want to touch on? Otherwise, I want to sort of move into how it connects to the system on the
I think that's all I have on that.
Okay, so,
We're climbing the face of the dam that we were looking at from down below. So that's the inlet structure that we saw be under construction in that picture. And there's where we were earlier. is a town of Woodstock, but this is not where the Woodstock Festival was. The Woodstock Festival was about an hour south of here, near the town of Bethel.